I'm Amanda Nelson. It has been such a pleasure to be here the past couple of days and to meet so many of you here in person. We love working with the CORE network. We love working with the CORE. It's so great to meet so many of your members who are here today. But this discussion, we think, is very timely, and we want to make sure that we have a lot of opportunity for questions at the end. But there are some big themes that we wanted to start with. And I think when we planned this originally, we sort of had different intentions. So part of what we want to make sure that we cover today is helping everyone here understand what's happening, what's changing, how are these amazing funding partners thinking about what's going on, what are they doing to adapt, and then also, what can we do coming out of this today, coming out of being here, coming out of being together, and what more can we do together? How can we continue to be better partners with our funding partners? And hopefully coming out of this, all of us feel inspired, not sad, but really like, okay, this is a rallying cry. And that is partially why also I asked Mary Ellen to come up here and make sure she could do the rally, right? So if, I guess you could just help us better understand right now your role within your organizations and how you focus your funding priorities with nonprofits. And then we'll get into like what's changing and what does that mean for the future.
I guess I'll go first. Good afternoon, everyone. You guys are a lively group. I'm not used to showing up at 4:30 and having people being this excited about life, so that's great. Shows your passion for the work, which is great. So I'm Kermit Khalib. As Mary Ellen said, I'm the strategy director for, well, actually my title changed last week, so there's no reason why you'd have known that. But I'm the strategy director for Credentials of Value, 2-year Credentials of Value at Lumina Foundation. And just to very briefly, Lumina Foundation, we're a national private foundation based in Indianapolis. We're the nation's largest foundation focused exclusively on post-secondary attainment and value. And basically what that means is most of what we do is funding in higher education and workforce development. We work with community colleges, we work with 4-year institutions, we work with non-traditional training providers, we work with state systems and other stakeholders to help increase educational opportunities for all learners, although historically we have a particular focus on expanding access for learners of color. And my particular portfolio, I oversee our community college workforce portfolio. So what I'm mostly doing is I'm working with community colleges, with states and with other stakeholders to help expand pathways, 2-year and short-term pathways into the labor market in partnership with, as I said, community colleges and other partners. And I'll stop there, but I can talk more about sort of what we're seeing and what's changing.
Great. Hi, everyone. I'm Janie McDermott. It's great to be here with you. It's been really fun to be here with you throughout the week and get to learn about the great work that you do. You got to hear a little earlier from my colleague Renita from the Casey Foundation, more on the programmatic side. So I feel like you've heard a lot about Casey today, but I sit at a different part of the foundation. I focus on our federal policy work. So I sit on a team that thinks about state, local, and federal policy. So but the Casey Foundation more broadly, just in case you weren't here earlier, is focused on building a brighter future for children, youth, and families. So we have a big focus in the past few years with our Thrive by 25 work, thinking about the transition to young adulthood, recognizing that those are really critical years for brain development and really getting on the right track, getting into a career pathway that could set you up for economic stability, building in the kinds of relationships, like we've talked a lot about mentorship and how important that is in the cores this week. So thinking about those supportive adults and peers who really set you up for success, and also knowing that even though those years are really important, they historically haven't been as invested in as, say, early childhood. So I partner with our programmatic colleagues and think about kind of what are they learning and what are these great solutions like the cores that they're working with, and how can we scale that up through federal policy. So I support grant making around policy advocacy, so supporting organizations who do organize the kind of events that you did yesterday when you went to the Hill. So making sure that our decision makers are actually hearing from people on the ground. They're hearing directly from young people. They're hearing from people who are working in programs. And sometimes that means thinking about, other voices who maybe they don't always hear from, or maybe would be helpful. For example, what does the business community say about workforce development and how important it is to them? So thinking about those kind of unlikely partners and what they might say, and also support some research to understand, how these policies have impacted young people and families, how they could be improved. And I think a lot of what we're thinking about right now is, how we can document what's happening, because a lot is happening very quickly, and it certainly will have an important impact.
Place to start. What are the conversations you're having right now with current grantee partners?
Sure. So I'll start by saying, philanthropy is also still figuring out what's going on right now. We did a lot of scenario planning. I'm sure a lot of your organizations also have, especially if you do rely on federal funding. We did a lot of thinking with our partners, with our grantees, thinking about all the different scenarios. Even given all of that, we're still, the scale and the scope of what we've seen, the speed, it isn't quite what any of us planned for. So we also are still, adapting and thinking about what that means, and we're really relying on our grantees and our partners to help guide that strategy, to tell us what they're hearing, to talk with my programmatic colleagues who are working more closely with partners on the ground like you, to understand, what are you hearing, what are you seeing, and how are some of these big federal changes that we're hearing about impacting you. So a lot of that's been just meeting with partners and understanding what they're experiencing, most of my grantees are not necessarily receiving federal funding, but some, do technical assistance, for example, for different agencies, and their budgets are impacted and their ability to kind of continue on and do some of our work. And then I also would say, we're doing a lot of thinking about coalitions, and just making sure that not only our individual partners are strong, but also the kind of ecosystem of organizations that they work with are also strong and working well together and coordinating, because there is just too much happening right now to be duplicating efforts and to not be working together. So really just making sure that, partners have a clear understanding of kind of who's covering what and who's leaning in where, and what our strengths are, I think is really important in this moment.
I would say there's sort of three ways that our current grantees and prospective grantees are kind of coming to us right now. There's I have within my portfolio, we have a number of projects that are in support of current federal grantees. So there was obviously a lot of funding that came out in the last administration for workforce development and higher education across a range of different agencies. A surprising number of agencies were engaged in workforce development. And so we were providing technical assistance and other capacity funding to help support those federal grantees. And I think the main conversation we're having right now is they are sort of saying, we don't know if we can keep doing what we were doing. We've gotten a stop work order, we've gotten indications that we can't continue to do the things that we had committed to the federal government we were going to do as part of this grant. That conversation right now is essentially, do what you need to do. We're going to hold you harmless in terms of our funding, because you're not in control of what you can and can't do. And so trying to have conversations about, do we need to extend your grant? Do we need to modify your grant? But whatever there is, at the moment, the thing we're trying to do is be as flexible and as understanding as possible, right? The second way that we're sort of hearing from our grantees is the project we're supporting isn't impacted, but other elements of the organization are impacted where the funding is going away. And so I think it's more about sort of, we know we're working with you on this, but are there ways that could you help fill holes here? And I think that those are the more challenging conversations in some ways, because we do not have a sort of a contingency fund. And so one of the things we've been trying to talk to grantees about is, there will be a time when we can talk about new work, but for right now, one of the things we want to make sure is we understand that the current grant current grantees are as stable as they can be. And then I guess the third, it's not really, I wouldn't say it's necessarily a conversation we're having with grantees yet, but a conversation that we're starting to think about is just sort of, putting aside what's happening with the funds that have gone out, there's also just this question about capacity at the federal level moving forward, and sort of what does that look like moving forward? What kind of assumptions can we make about what sort of activities the federal government will be engaging in 2 years from now, 4 years from now, 6 years from now? And I think that's a conversation we haven't really started talking too much to grantees about, because I think nobody knows. But I do think it's something that we are starting in the back of our head to start to think about, is like, we do a lot of work with the U.S. Department of Education or with U.S. Department of Education grantees. If the U.S. Department of Education is a different agency a year from now, what does that mean? Where is the data coming from? Where is the support coming from? So those are the main ways in which we're. But in all cases, I think the idea here is we are still committed to the work, and we are still committed to our grantees, and we want them to be successful. And so our first priority right now is to make sure that the current grantees can keep their work going. And then for new and prospective grantees, I think we're trying to think about how do we continue to advance our mission and advance their mission while recognizing that it's the landscape is changing very dramatically every day.
Yeah. I'd love to talk a little bit more about prospective future partners. There's so many nonprofits right now that are losing funding or at risk of losing funding and are needing to diversify their revenue and looking to new partners and different partners, including many of you here today. And with our own clients at Or Group, we are working with about 60 nonprofits right now across a lot of different areas. Part of our job is to find and engage great funders like you, and trying to make sure there's alignment with these nonprofits. Would love to sort of hear how you're approaching these conversations with prospective new grantee partners, and what's different. What should all of us be thinking about right now if we have the opportunity to get a meeting with you and to come and talk to you about potentially partnering in the future?
That's a great question. We actually will have a bunch of new grantees. We actually just announced we have a new strategic plan and a new goal that we released last Tuesday. Fortuitous timing. Hence the new title. Yes. The truth is, in a lot of ways, there was a lot of the work that we were doing to get ready for the announcement of our new goal and our new strategy has been underway for 6 months, 9 months, a year. And I think the truth is, one of the things we are trying to do is we're trying to stay consistent to that planning as much as we can. And so the work needs to keep going, and we need to keep going. And so I think that's kind of been our mindset, is we have this goal, we have this new set of strategies that we want to implement. As long as our partners are still ready to do the work, we are ready to be in solidarity with them. I think the thing I would say about sort of philanthropy right now, I would agree with Janie. I think the truth is, like, everyone is sort of trying to process a lot of information in a rapidly changing environment right now. So I think it's hard in some cases to actually tell you what we're going to be doing a month from now. I think this reminds me in many ways of COVID, where there was it was a dramatic shift. There was a lot of changes, very significant structural changes. And I think the challenge for philanthropy is, our instinct is to help, to be helpful, but we also have to be consistent and disciplined about our commitment to our mission and our partners. And so I think the one thing, I guess, in terms of advice, I would say is, I will speak for my own foundation. We have a mission, we have a strategy, we have a set of rules around who we give, what kind of projects we can support, what kind of work we can't support, and our intention is to try to stay as consistent to that mission and those rules as possible. So I think the thing to be thinking about as you're thinking about reaching out to philanthropy is, we're not undifferentiated pots of money, that each of us have we have boards, we have a set of rules, we have a set of priorities that we're trying to advance. And so the thing to be thinking about is learning in advance, or trying to learn in advance as much as you can about a given potential funding partner, because at the end of the day, there's a lot of people who are in need right now, and we are empathetic and we are supportive. But at the end of the day, I have to go back to my executive team and my board and say, this is why I think we should fund this particular project. And so the more homework you can do at the front end to help us understand how your mission and your vision and your goals, and I want to just take a second to acknowledge the great work that you all are doing in your communities, and thank you for what you do and will continue to do. But just helping us understand how what you're doing aligns with the things that we are supposed to be funding makes it a lot easier for us to make the justification for what it is for making an investment or helping to support you in this time.
Yeah, I totally agree with all of that, and I think your current funders can be really important resources in helping you navigate some of the kind of the doing your homework on other foundations. Funders talk to each other a lot. We have insights into kind of what each other's strategic priorities are, and a lot of times also understand, maybe even sometimes before they've been publicly announced, like where funders are exploring going. So I think that can be really helpful and important. And your funders invest in you because they really believe in your work, and they are willing. I mean, I don't want to speak for everyone, but I certainly would be willing to have grantees come talk to me and try to brainstorm with them, other funders, and also other ways to frame your work that just could be, maybe a lens that you didn't think about, or a connection that maybe, maybe just hadn't thought of. So I would say that. I would also say, when you're approaching funders right now, I think it's important to be realistic and transparent about kind of the context that you're in. If you're trying to propose work that's very contingent on federal funding, I think that you need to be clear about that, and that doesn't mean that something won't happen or something won't move forward, but I think it's just a really, I think it shows that you kind of understand some of the risks and realities of this moment, and being able to demonstrate that you have a plan to adapt. I think that that's really important right now, because I think we're all, I think there's a lot of calculated risk happening right now, and a lot of it is kind of what funders might be willing to, what level of risk they might be willing to take on if something is kind of tied into some federally supported work.
So one thing I know we've been hearing is it's not business as usual, and you're trying to be agile. And what are you looking to nonprofits right now to be able to come to you to be more compelling? So absolutely doing the work to make sure there's a strategic alignment, that the impact is there, the track record is there, but what else are you looking to nonprofit leaders right now in talking to you that they can say, we've done the scenario planning, we're not operating like business as usual? And would love to hear from you too, and then Mary Ellen, want to pull you in for more of the context with CORES specifically here.
That's a hard one. I mean, I think being clear about your mission, and I think that's important, and that's kind of like the long-term vision. I think in a way, like being realistic about the moment we're in, but not getting so caught up in it that you're kind of losing sight of some of the great work that you've done, and that you're continuing to do. I think that still is really, I think kind of that balance is really important, and I think can still be compelling, and I think there's a lot of conversation among funders right now, and being practical but not losing sight of our North Stars, and thinking in that way. So I think that's, I'll stop there.
I think I still think of myself as new to philanthropy because I'm only 5 years in. One of the things I will say that there's a lot to like about it, but one of the things that you miss is you're not as close to the ground as your grantees are. And I think the thing that you have right now that we're really hungry for is information and context and helping to understand the moment, because we are, this is I think a lot of folks are looking to philanthropy to help bridge gaps between where we are now and where we will be in the future. And I think we can't do that. We can't make those decisions without the information that you have, the experiences that you have. And so I think that's the first thing I would say is like the thing that you offer right now is sharing your stories, helping us understand what the impact of the day-to-day activities have on your operations. And I think so I think that's just seeing philanthropy is very much a trust-based exercise, right? We are putting our faith in you that you are going to use these dollars to do good. And so I think a lot of this is right now the moment is about building and sustaining that trust. I'll say too, I want to agree with Janie's point about like, I think the other thing we're sort of recognizing is that we have limitations, right? Like we have sort of rules of the road for how we do our giving, and those rules don't change dramatically. But we are very interested in trying to help connect you to, if I can't help you, I do this all the time. I'm like, I can't help you, but I do know someone who might be interested in talking to you. And as Janie said, we talk to other philanthropic partners all the time. We're always very interested, like my day is made when I can connect you to, if I can't fund you, if I can connect you to someone else who can, that makes my day. So it's so helping us understand like how you think about your work, thinking about how you would frame your work. That is also really helpful because I think about this a lot. Like in this past few years, there's workforce funders and there's environmental funders, and they're completely different communities, and they hadn't ever talked to one another, and they've started talking to one another in the last few years. There's still opportunities to be, maybe you have always talked to higher education or workforce funders. Are there opportunities for us to connect you to other funder communities that you've never connected with? Like this is the time to start to build those connections. And so trying to help us think about how we can be helpful to you and coming with some ideas about what are some directions you'd like to try, that's really helpful for us.
So it makes me kind of really glad to hear you both say that although we are in a rather uncertain moment of time, to stay focused on your North Star. And I think I've been struggling with that a little bit. We have been working with the OR group for a couple of years now. We actually are embarking on putting on a case study. And when we started this conversation 6 months ago, it was kind of really focused on the big picture. How do we drive some really significant investments into cores for workforce development, for career pathways, into green jobs, credentials and apprenticeships, and now we're in a conversation. We had board and core council meeting where we're kind of looking at some worst case scenario planning, and I think our cores are doing the same. So we've been trying to balance between the current moment but not abandoning our North Star. And so I'm really kind of heartened to hear that philanthropy is still interested in focusing on the long term, knowing that we have to kind of make it through the short term. But I do think it's important, and the Core Network is doing this, is looking at your budgets and prioritizing things. What are the things that I absolutely have to keep doing? What are the things that, where I can maybe cut back? I think one of the first things, that the Core Network would do would maybe look at our lease. Do we need to have in-person space anymore? So we're doing a little bit of that planning, and I think I would urge maybe our core partners to look at their, and some of our cores really don't depend on too much federal funding, and that, but we also have talked about there might be trickle-down effect. So. Just kind of, I think, looking at different scenarios and how you'd respond. And I feel better knowing that, okay, here's what we need to function at this level. Here's what we need to function at this level if we want to continue to deliver this service. And I feel like that is helpful to have for funders. To say to our funders, we're going to continue to pursue our North Star. But you know what? In order to survive for the next 12 to 18 months, this is what we need. So I'm not sure if you all are hearing that from others. I guess one other point I would make is one of our board members is on the Kresge Foundation, and she said that there's just no way that philanthropy can fill the gap that federal funding could leave, and we have to understand that right off the bat. They will help where they can, and we then have to figure out what are our priorities in terms of asking from philanthropy, knowing that you're not going to fill an entire $15 million budget that might go away.
She had an interesting stat, which was talking about, and I'm sure that you have people coming to you and saying, during COVID, you increased your budget and you were spending a lot more. But to Mary Ellen's point, that this gap is so big that even if every funder released this philanthropy, it wouldn't last that long. So what other, Kermit, I love that you said it would make your day. That makes my day too. But what other types of funding partners are you referring, nonprofits to if they're not another national nonprofit? Are you looking to, or are there opportunities for all of us to be looking to, local nonprofits or other places where maybe it was harder to go there and it was easier to talk to you, but things are shifting. So do you have any recommendations or experiences of other places where we can go to seek new funding partnerships?
Yeah, I think community foundations, just understanding who the local funders in your area are. I think corporate funders. I'll stop there. Those are the ones that come to mind.
Yeah, I agree with that. There's a dizzying array of philanthropy out there, from national organizations like ours to community and local foundations, or state level foundations, corporate foundations, and I think, obviously, at this point, to the extent that you need additional resources, and of course you need additional resources, but to the extent you're trying to kind of keep the doors open, I think it's important to kind of keep an open mind, and you may have to, I think one thing to be thinking about, again, is if you talk to one foundation, you've talked to one foundation. We all have very different rules and sort of priorities, and so a lot of it is going to be about sort of pitching the message in a way that aligns with that particular foundation's mission and vision and goals. You don't need me to tell you that. You've all been doing fundraising for a long time, but I think in this particular moment there may be some connections that you could make that wouldn't otherwise. To your point, right? If you've been in a comfortable space with your current funders and that's not enough to keep going, then then there's a good time to start to meet some new folks and introduce them to the mission of your core. I think I mentioned the thing that we're sort of looking on the horizon is you mentioned the 12 to 18 months. We don't know if it's 12 or 18 months, right? I think that's the thing that we're sort of wrestling with now, is that a lot of our sort of, when COVID happened, we all knew it was going to be temporary, right? It was going to change. Things were different, but at some point it was going to go back. I don't know that we feel that same level of confidence now, and that means starting to think about state governments and local governments and others as maybe the ones that are going to be the primary partners on a lot of this work. And so that's even as I think you should continue to share the message with your federal policymakers about the importance of the work that you do. This is again sort of, we need to be starting to think about who else needs to hear your message and needs to hear your story, because that's just something I think we have to kind of keep in the back of our mind, is the fundamental reality of the situation.
Ellen, you had talked about this, so maybe I want to ask two questions, and then would love to have time for Q&A with the audience. I think, Mary Ellen, you and I were talking about this scenario about state and local. I know this came up at the board meeting as well, and the just trickle-down effect that we anticipate will be happening maybe next week. But the first question is, what are you really worried about? Like, what's the thing that you're really, really worried about? And then let's all sort of talk about the worries. Then what's the thing that is giving you hope right now? Marilyn, I want to start with you.
A lot of our cores are, and the core network are heavily dependent on federal dollars. Fortunately, and I think a lot of our cores have done this also, we have intentionally tried to diversify funding, both through federal, state, corporate, philanthropy, different project sponsors, and I think we need to continue to do that. And I wonder that as federal government shrinks, if state and local government may need to grow to absorb some of those needs and get some of that work done, that maybe that's where cores should focus for a time being. But yes, I think probably AmeriCorps is my biggest concern, although we are seeing the process of the approval process for agreements with Department of Interior and U.S. Forest Service hung up to the point where sort of nothing is getting out. So there are a number of threats on the federal side. So we need to pivot potentially quickly, and so that definitely keeps me up. But I'm really hopeful. First of all, I'm really optimistic. We were not knowing who would come to the conference, given that there's a lot of uncertainty right now. We have 280 folks from the core world here with us. I think at least 80 cores, maybe even 90 cores represented, which is a big percentage. And even though a lot of our federal partners couldn't be here, we do have some. We have some federal partners who even took time off to come on their own vacation time or on their own dime to come be with us. So that tells me that there is a lot of support for what we do and a lot of heart in this room. And I am feeling so much better leaving after being with all of you all for 4 days than I was coming into it, just because the core community is really just, it's good people, and I said at the beginning, if I'm ever going to go through a rough time, I would want it to be with these folks. So that's what I'm optimistic about, and I do believe that there is we are going to come out on the other side of this, and the things that we all do every day are going to be needed more desperately than ever.
That's great. I think what worries me most is also the trickle down, but a slightly different trickle down. Like on the federal level, it's not just AmeriCorps and the Forest Service and these other agencies. I think even if, for example, we see major cuts to Medicaid, which is, I'm sure not a lot of us in the room work on Medicaid or think about Medicaid every day, but some of the proposals to shift costs to states, I mean, if that happens, states are going to need to do a lot of shifts and make some really hard decisions that very likely could impact, the cores and higher education and workforce development. And I think we've seen historically that when we see federal cuts to Medicaid, it then does come down and shrink higher education budgets in particular. So that's something that I'm really concerned about, because I think, we hear about the issues at the federal level that we focus on, but some of it's like the bigger picture that, of course we're doing our day-to-day and we're living our lives, and we're not necessarily thinking about all of the other kind of like constellation of federal changes that can come down on the state in a different way. But I will say I'm very hopeful that I think people are really engaged right now. I meet with a lot of partners who work in advocacy, and they're telling me, like, we are maxing out on our Zoom rooms. We're having to go on YouTube Live. We've never seen this much engagement. I've heard from friends who work for congressional offices, they've never seen the phone lines like this. So I think we're seeing this, and this isn't just from people who are paid to work in advocacy. I mean, this is from people all across the country who are really engaged in paying attention. A particularly hopeful moment I felt in the past few months is a grantee who works in the faith community. So they do advocacy around hunger and nutrition. And they had, several thousand faith leaders from across the country who are just paying attention. And I think that that's really hopeful. And I think that, we all need to be vigilant about what's happening and supporting one another. And I think that that's just keeping me going right now.
Obviously, the biggest worry, honestly, is that the next Tommy doesn't have a place to go, doesn't have that future, and doesn't have that pathway in front of them. And I think that is to some extent inevitable. That we're going to have missed opportunities to connect with people who need what you do, and that keeps me up every night across a lot of domains because it's. Because there's a lot of people who need help, and not having an open door and a helping hand in this moment is going to be tough. And so I'm heartened that all of you are out in your communities and that you are part of this network. And so I think that's and to the extent that you guys are continue to do that work, I think that gives me hope. But it is certainly a worry that there's just some inevitable losses that we're going to incur as part of this process. I am also though heartened by, to your point, the sort of the level of more constructive engagement in some ways. I think the sense of there's a certain sort of rolling up of sleeves, and we've got a triage here in a way that I think is really really useful, right? I think it is really it's an opportunity to think about what will be next, right? And it's not a good thing to be forced into that situation, but it is an opportunity to start to think about if we are going to be rebuilding at some point the systems that we want to support. How would we rebuild them? How will we rebuild them in ways that are more resilient? How will we build them in ways that are better supported and better understood? And that I think is I think that is part of the storytelling and the messaging aspect of this moment is it has sometimes been easy to be known to relatively few people in your community. I think now is the time to really be sharing with your community. Here's what we do. Here's what we bring, and we are of you. We are a part of the community as well. And so I think that's so that gives me heart because I see that happening. There's a lot of after sort of the initial shock that we have, as I've said, we've had grantees who. They don't know if they can go forward with some of the work, but they're thinking about, all right, well, if we can't use this language, we'll use this language. If we can't do this set of activities, we're going to do this set of activities. But the mission doesn't change. The needs didn't go away. And so I think that's been what I'm already seeing is sort of all right, well, this is what we do. This is what we have to do now, so this is what we're going to do. But this is what we do, and this is we do it well, and we're going to do it. So that's I think, an important part of this moment.
I know I've had this conversation with so many of you in the room, and Joe from Florida, I'm looking at you and how it's so inspirational. I'll start with what I'm inspired by, I guess. The voices, the leadership, the people that are rising into the occasion. And what I was so impressed by in talking to Joe was talking about, the stories, the impact, the next Tommies, the current Tommies. Tommy, little did you know. And the work we're doing, and it's so great to hear that alignment with funders and the focus there. And I am so amazed by the people who are stepping up and the nonprofit leaders who are stepping up in their communities nationally. I won't say who, it wasn't Mary Ellen, but I have a client, another CEO of a nonprofit who wrote her own bill and sent it to her senator around Trump being able to be arrested and retaliation not possible for the people who would uphold that. And it would never occur to me to try to write a bill. I was amazed. I was like, wow, that's incredible. So I think people are stepping up. All of you are stepping up. We all care so deeply about our work. And I love also, Janie, what you said about coalitions. This is a built-in coalition. What can we be doing together? How can we be helping each other? And that's also been a huge part of the themes of our conversations over the past few days, is being here together and building on that. So thank you so much for this conversation, for this perspective, for being in the room with us, and for helping everyone here have a greater impact with you in their work together.